Hey, Orange Nation, and welcome to Under the Orange Lights, a live webcast that connects the OTF community with industry experts. I'm your host, Dr. Rachelle Reed. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I'm your Director of Fitness Science at OTF. Today, we have a special guest from WW, Dr.Chad Rethorst, who is an expert in all things sports and exercise psychology. We are going to be talking today about that very topic. Chad, we're so excited to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
So Chad and I have become quick friends because we have a lot in common with our academic backgrounds and now working in the industry. But Chad, I thought we would kick things off by just letting the audience get to know you a little bit. Can you tell us about your career? You've been so successful both in academia and now working for WW. So talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess in earnest, my academic career started with my PhD that I earned in kinesiology at Arizona State University. And there I had an emphasis in sport and exercise psychology. And it was during that time that I really began to focus my interest and my research on the relationship between physical activity and mental health. And specifically looking at the effectiveness of exercise as a treatment for depression and anxiety disorders. From there, I went to do a postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of Rochester Medical Center in their Department of Psychiatry. And after that, went to join the faculty at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, again in the psychiatry department. And I was there for just over 10 years before making the jump to industry and starting my position here at WW. So I've been at WW for a little over a year now. Here at WW, I'm the Director of Clinical Research. So in that role, I oversee a portfolio of research projects that we conduct in collaboration with academic partners. And that research primarily focuses on demonstrating the efficacy or effectiveness of the WW programs, and then also evaluating ways in which we can continue to optimize and improve our program for our members.
Well, I mean, you have quite the background, and I think it's very awesome that WW has you on the team to help communicate all of that science and really translate everything that's going on in the academic world into the industry space. So thank you again for being here. Our conversation today is going to cover a lot of topics for our audience, including how to combat your lack of motivation for exercise. We're even going to dispel some exercise psychology myths that we hear a lot about. And we're going to talk through what type of exercise or what types of exercise might be best for experiencing those mental health benefits that you did so much research on, Chad. So thank you again for being here. Let's dive in. I wanted to start today by just talking about and really framing up our conversation about how, most people know that exercise is good for us. That's a well-known fact. However, there's a real lack of adherence to the physical activity guidelines, meaning there's a lot of people who know it's great, but just can't seem to get started with incorporating physical activity into their lifestyle. So can you comment just on how physical activity and most health behaviors like physical activity, it can be really hard to get started with that?
Yeah, we hear that from everybody, right? That it's hard to stay motivated, it's hard to get started, and we definitely talk to our members here at WW about some ways that they can continue to be motivated and begin and maintain a physical activity routine. So I think one of the first things that I would suggest to people is that they have a plan. The good news is when we think about health behaviors and we think about how we would like ourselves to behave in the future, we're actually really good at knowing what's best for us in the future. True. And we can use that to our advantage by making a decision to plan for our future self. So plan out the activity you want to engage in and be specific with that plan. What day do you want to be active? What time? What exactly are you going to do? What are you going to wear? It's also a good time to think about the obstacles that you are likely to encounter in becoming in that time when it's time to be active. So
Mm-hmm.
think about, oh, maybe you're tired. Maybe you feel like there are other things that are going to be interfering or might take priority. We've all experienced those in the past. And so we can use those past experiences to think about and plan for those obstacles that are likely to cause us problems when it's time to be active. The second thing I think that's really important is to think about and visualize your why for activity. It's one thing to set a goal and to have that specific goal ready to go, but it's also important for a person to have a very clear sense of why they want to be active.
Yes.
And how you think about, how you talk about that change is really instrumental in creating that change. So here at WW, we encourage our members to accept and celebrate themselves for who they are. And this includes leaning into what matters to them most. A member's why will symbolize what's most meaningful and what matters most to them. And then when it's finally time to start being active, especially for somebody who's maybe newer to activity, I think it's really important to start small. Set a goal that's really attainable. That's going to mean that you're more likely to be successful.
Yep.
And often once you start activity, it's getting started that's the hardest part. You may tell yourself that you're only going to go for a 5-minute walk or walk up and down one flight of stairs. But once you actually start the activity, then it's often a lot easier to maintain and decide you're going to do a little bit more than what you had planned to do. And the final thing, oh, sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
No, I was just going to say, I love that because I think having those really, really small mini goals, and actually science shows this too, right? Having those little mini goals that you have over time, you meet them, and that helps drive you towards achieving a larger end goal, right? So yeah. I think that's perfect.
Right, absolutely. The success there is really important, and that ties into the last point that I really want to make here is that when you're being active, you want to make activity reinforcing, and success is one way in which that activity can be reinforcing. Another great way is to make sure you're choosing an activity that you enjoy doing. And for some people that's hard. So I think there are some tricks that we can use to help people when it's hard to find an activity that they think that they really enjoy. One great example of that is temptation building. So this is a concept from behavioral science that in which you pair an activity that you're not so excited about with something that you're really excited about. So in the context of activity, that might be walking on the treadmill, which maybe you're not super excited about, but you want to get started. And you bundle that with watching your favorite show on Netflix or listening to your favorite podcast. That way you have some piece of that experience that you're really, really looking forward to, and that can make the entire experience more reinforcing.
I think that's such a good takeaway for the audience that's tuning in and listening, right? That you can pair physical activity with something else. I oftentimes will give my mom a call and I'll go for a walk with the dog while I'm chatting with her and catching up with her, for example. So that's a really good way to sort of get some physical activity in while I'm also doing something that I really enjoy doing. So I think that's a great takeaway for our members tuning in. So related to this, Chad, is something called mindset. And I know there's a ton of research out there related to mindset and physical activity adherence. People who are able to achieve a certain type of mindset around physical activity tend to stick with it a little bit more. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so really broadly, we think about mindset as the way you think or how you think. And we know, as you mentioned, that it's really important when it comes to health behavior change. And so for a lot of people, it's a matter of shifting their mindset or shifting the way in which they think. And one great way that you can shift your mindset to support yourself in becoming more active is to shift yourself towards an activity identity. So an activity identity is you viewing yourself as someone who is active. And that can play a role in how active you actually become. For example, for someone who thinks of themselves as a biker, they're more likely to go for a bike ride, or the more they think of themselves as a runner, the more likely they are to go out for a run. So they can use that. And again, as you build that identity and think of yourself not only think of activity as something that you do, but instead part of who you are, that can help build that confidence and that motivation to be active and maintain that activity level.
I think that is directly related to the community that we develop and foster at OTF within our physical brick and mortar studios, right? Once members come in, they start to build a community around them. And that reminds me of a construct called social support that we often talk about in exercise psychology. Can you talk about that a little bit, and how that sort of the family environment and the community environment that group exercise really helps create can be so important for helping you shift that activity identity?
Yeah, so I think there are two pieces that are probably relevant there for your members at OTF. And I think the first there is that social support, right?
Yep.
There's some accountability that comes along with other members who expect to see you at a class at a given day, at a given time. They are people who are going through the same journey that you are going through. So they have the same obstacles that they're trying to overcome, the same challenges. And they're also then there to help you celebrate your success. And then I think also for OTF members, they will start to think of themselves as OTF members, right? So that is specifically thinking about what that identity is, that they're no longer a person who goes to OTF. They are an OTF member. And because of that, that is part of their activity identity that can help support them as they continue to be more active.
I love that. And again, I think that can relate to everybody, whether you are an OTF member, whether you're a WW member, or maybe whether you are working out with your family members at home, right, during this crazy time that we're all living through. So this reminds me, Chad, that we are getting some really awesome questions within the chat here on YouTube. If you are tuning in and you have questions, make sure to drop them in there so Chad can address them live. And we just got one in from Tammy that is related to mindset. So Chad, I'm going to read it to you here. She says, some days I have the best of intentions, but then skip on exercising, and then it feels like the entire day is a downward spiral with all health behavior. So food choices, any tips that you have about being able to even shift that mindset within a day?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things at play there, right? I think the first is giving yourself permission to not be perfect, right? That there are going to be times where you don't feel like being active, and that's okay, right? It's not something you have to do. You don't have to strive for perfection. You always have the opportunity to try again tomorrow, and think about it really as a long-term journey, right? That this is not something that you're going to make or break your habits and your behavior because of one day. And so I think it's really important to think of it in that broader context. The other thing that I think is useful, and I know we'll talk about this more in a little bit here, but is the idea of using activity as a tool to actually help you feel better, improve your mood. If you're feeling stressed, instead of having that stress feel like a reason not to be active, think of activity as a tool to help you deal with that stress. And again, maybe it's only a 5-minute walk. Maybe you had planned on a half hour, but now you really think you only have time for 5 or 10 minutes. That's okay too. Give yourself that flexibility to do what feels right for you in the moment.
I think that permission is something that with kind of the culture right now, that's hard to give yourself, right? With culture in the fitness industry and the myth of like more is always better, it can be hard to allow yourself to take some lighter physical activity days. So I think that's such a good take-home point. Thank you for saying that. So this kind of leads me into our next topic, Chad. There are so many different types of exercise, and you've been talking a little bit about the mental health benefits of exercise and how exercise can be protective of lots of things. Can you talk about what kind of the best type of exercise is for accruing those health benefits?
Yeah, so I think let me have the opportunity to break it down both in mental health and physical health. I think there's a lot of overlap there.
Agreed.
So what we know about the effects of physical activity on your mood is there are both immediate benefits to being active and there are longer term benefits in terms of improving, especially for people who have a anxiety or depressive disorder. We know that long term activity can help with those things, but we also know that for most people, if they engage in a bout of activity, they are likely going to report feeling happier, more relaxed, even during and after that immediate bout of activity. And what we know from the scientific literature is that both aerobic activities and resistance training activities seem to have similar effects on somebody's mood. So really at that point, I tell people typically to do the activity that they want to do and will continue to do. The best activity is the activity you will do.
Yep.
And so I think that's really important. And it gets back to that idea of finding an activity that's reinforcing to you. That's really the most important piece. And then, if we're thinking about somebody who's already very active and they're looking to really optimize the benefits of activity and really get the most that they can out of being active, then I think we start to think about activities typically beyond moderate intensity aerobic activity. I think for most people, when they start to think about physical activity, that's what they focus on, that it's walking, it's riding a bike, it's walking on a treadmill, maybe running. And there are definite benefits to that. But I think if you really want to optimize your physical health, there are a few other things that I want to call out. So the World Health Organization, when they have their physical activity guidelines, they, in addition to the moderate intensity activities, they also call out resistance training specifically. They recommend that individuals engage in resistance training 2 to 3 times a week. And that in doing so, you're going to potentially increase your muscle mass, develop stronger bones, improve your joint flexibility, and there may also be some benefits on weight control along with that. And then the other type of activity is taking that aerobic activity and also including some higher intensity aerobic activities. And that's something that we focus on, both the resistance training and the high intensity activity here at WW. So we have our FitPoint system, which we have for our members to track how active they are. And our members get extra credit, so to speak, when they engage in those resistance training and high intensity activities, because we know that there are additional health benefits for those.
I love that you guys have taken that into account with your point system. I think it's so smart because, again, it's reinforcing those behaviors and helping people meet those small goals every day so that it does become part of their lifestyle. So very smart. And I love pointing out the science behind the approach you guys use at WW. I think that's really important. So would you say, Chad, from the evidence that we have from the World Health Organization and years of exercise science research, decades even, that if somebody comes to OTF about 2 to 3 times per week, they're getting that optimal dose of both aerobic activity as well as some resistance training using the floor modalities?
Yeah, I think that's right in line with the recommendations. And I'll point out that, again, as we talk about both physical health and mental health, from what we know from the literature, that the dose that is necessary seems to be about the same for mental health. So about 150 minutes a week, moderate intensity activity, including some resistance training. So it's right in line with getting the most for both physical and mental health benefits.
I love that. And when you say 150 minutes, it sounds like so much. So can you talk a little bit about the epidemiological or the kind of the evidence that we have for people who are just trying to get started? Like, do you have to go from 0 to 150, or can you just do something? And what health benefit does that have if you just do something small even?
Yeah, absolutely. Some activity is better than no activity. And we see that in the epidemiological research. You see what we call a dose response curve. So the benefit for activity gradually increases with the amount of activity that you do. So for every additional minute of activity you're doing, you're getting some incremental benefit for that activity, especially up to that 150 minutes a week. And I think that's really important when we think overall about the context of being a more active person. And it's something we tell our members here at WW, is that every activity counts, that it's not just those 20 to 30 minute bouts of activity that are very intentional. It's taking your dog for a walk. It's walking to and from your car in the parking lot when you go to the grocery store. It's taking the flight of stairs instead of the elevator. All of those small little doses of activity, they all count. And we encourage you to find opportunities throughout your day to be more active.
I think that message is important always, but especially right now as we are living amongst a pandemic and it's harder for some people to get to facilities where they used to exercise, right? A lot of gyms are reclosing, and I know we've actually had some questions come through the chat about that very topic. We actually have Marcella joining us, and she's letting us know that she really misses her time with the OTF community. And that goes back to that mindset, that activity identity too, right? So do you have any encouraging words for people like Marcella who are out there, who are just having trouble kind of keeping going with physical activity, maintaining some semblance of normality in this kind of crazy world right now?
Yeah, I think that's really important to recognize that this has disrupted everybody's routines and the way they've thought about activity. And I know personally, I've gone through the same thing, right? I was someone who went to the gym 4 or 5 days a week. I loved primarily doing resistance training. And now I'm at home and I have a couple kettlebells and that's all I have, right? So it's again, I think for somebody who's motivated and is already used to being pretty active, I think it gets back to that idea of finding that new activity that you enjoy and can do. It's probably not going to look the same as it did pre-pandemic, but again, trying different things out, figuring out what works best for you. And I'm sure part of that also, especially probably for OTF members, is missing that social support and that community that they were so used to having. And so, maybe that's a little harder to find, but maybe it's finding a friend that you're walking together, or at least maybe you're tracking each other's walks if you're not walking together. So there are ways that you can still look for that social support, even though you may not be able to go to an OTF class to get it.
I think that's really helpful. And that kind of ties in a lot of the themes that we've talked about today. I do want to make sure we hit 2 more topics. The first one is just about myths in exercise psychology. I feel like exercise psychology is such an interesting field, and so many people want to know more about it. So can you shed some light on maybe a common myth that you like to bust as an exercise psychologist?
Yeah, definitely. So I think when I tell people about the type of research that I do, probably 75% of them, I say, I talk about I research how physical activity makes you feel better or improves your mood. And they say, endorphins, right? And
Yep.
I kind of have to bite my tongue. So it is true that for somebody who is really active for a long period of time, that they will have a release of endorphins, and that release of endorphins does result in an improved mood. But we know that endorphin release only happens with high intensity activity that is fairly long in duration as well. So while it's not clear exactly all of the biological mechanisms that are at play when we look at the mood enhancing effects of activity, we know that there are likely a lot of them, but for most people, it's not the endorphins that are causing that improvement in mood.
I think I feel like a lot of audience members' minds are blown from you walking us through that. So that's super interesting. You heard it here from an exercise psychologist himself. I love that. So we do have a couple of questions that came in through our Instagram earlier this week from members. I wanted to first ask you a question. If you have somebody who is already really active, what would you recommend that they do? So say you have somebody who is an OTF member, they're already taking class 3 to 4 times per week because their physical studio location is still open, or maybe they're engaging in our online workout program. What would you recommend that they do as far as physical activity behaviors?
Yeah, so I think for somebody who's already active, I think the main thing I would focus on for them is to diversify their activity. And we already talked about the resistance training and the high intensity activity and the additional benefits that those have. So I think those are really important. And I think stretching or yoga is another great activity to incorporate into your fitness routine. Beyond sort of the physical benefits and the health benefits of that, I think it also can help to improve your performance, right? If you're stretching and staying healthier, if you're doing resistance training and getting stronger, all of that's going to improve your performance. And having that variety in activity is also going to help you with getting bored or getting burned out in the current routine you have. And I think the other thing that I'd call out for those people who are already very active is to take some time to rest. Again, staying healthy and again, thinking about it as a long-term journey, that you want to be active for the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life. And you won't be able to do that if you're either getting burned out and don't want to be active anymore, or if you're so active that you're at risk for injuries. So take some time off, listen to your body, make sure that you feel good as you're being active.
I love that. Giving people, again, permission to take some time off, to take some lighter days, especially during a holiday season. For many people who are celebrating holidays coming up, that's going to look and feel a little bit different than it has in years past. So again, that permission and just kind of bringing things full circle is so important. So we did have one more question from the audience that we wanted to make sure that we addressed here. And it's just about easing back in. So we know a lot of people back in March and April, when many gyms and fitness facilities first closed down amidst the pandemic, had an abrupt change in their routine in every single way, whether it was work, family obligations, physical activity. So many things were different. And so for somebody who's just now kind of easing back in, what would you suggest, thinking about all of the topics we've covered today? What's maybe your top 2 takeaways for that person?
Yeah, so I think one comes back to the routine, right? That your routine is different and you have to have a plan to think about how that routine's different. And again, I can speak from personal experience. I was in the habit of going to work, leaving the office, and going straight to the gym. And it was a habit for me. And then that habit got disrupted, right? And I don't leave the house, and I'm not leaving the office to go to work. So it's developing that new habit, setting that schedule, finding a time that works for you. And so I think that's really important. And for someone who's really easing back in, I think, again, the idea of starting small, setting realistic goals, and giving yourself that permission to not be perfect as you start that journey back up.
I think that was a perfect way to close things up, Chad, because we have covered so many topics, and I know you've hit the nail on the head for so many of our members right now who are just wanting to get back to their routines and wanting to kind of get started again with their physical activity journey. So thank you so much, Chad. Again, we've been talking with Dr. Chad Rethorst, WW's Director of Clinical Research. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to everybody who's tuning in and being part of Under the Orange Lights, which is a live webcast dedicated to connecting the Orangetheory community with industry experts just like Chad, who are ready to answer all of your questions about fitness, health, and wellness. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to get a notification the next time we are going live. Thank you so much for being here, Orange Nation, and until next time, stay healthy.